Hello everyone, and welcome. I'm excited to have you here today. Today's presentation is titled Modern Identity and Access Management with Microsoft Entra ID and Business Central. We'll be exploring how to transition from user groups to security groups and permission sets, aimed at enhancing both security and efficiency. Over the next few slides, we'll cover key concepts, best practices, and practical tips to help you implement these changes smoothly. Let's get started. Let's take a moment to understand Entra ID and security groups. Microsoft Entra ID, formerly known as Azure Active Directory, is all about modern identity and access management. One of the great things is that Entra ID maintains compatibility with legacy setups, so existing systems continue to work smoothly. At the same time, it introduces new capabilities that help us enhance how we manage identities and control access. Entra ID still handles groups of users, authentication, and authorization just like before, but now it supports Microsoft 365 and Azure services even more effectively. This ensures a seamless experience across the Microsoft ecosystem. Microsoft made sure that during this transition, developers and IT professionals faced no disruptions. There were no changes to the tools or resources they rely on for authentication and authorization, which is crucial for ongoing operations. Importantly, the rebranding to Entra ID happened without any interruption to user experience or service availability. All existing login URLs, APIs, PowerShell commands, and Microsoft Authentication Libraries, or MSAL, remain the same, making the transition smooth for everyone. In summary, Microsoft Entra ID is simply the new name for what you knew as Azure AD. This change reflects Microsoft's ongoing evolution in the identity and access management space, emphasizing a forward-looking approach. All right, let's dive into the difference between user groups and security groups. First, when we talk about user groups, we're referring to a modern approach to managing access that is dynamic and managed through Microsoft Entra ID or Windows Active Directory. This means the groups can automatically update based on user attributes, making management much easier and more efficient. These groups provide centralized control across Microsoft 365 applications, which helps streamline permissions and access management. They are often used together with permission sets to define what users can do, offering more flexibility and easier maintenance compared to older methods. Speaking of which, permission sets allow us to define granular access rights, giving us precise control over what each user can access or modify. However, it's important to note that this model is set to be deprecated in the 2024 Wave 2 release. Instead, Microsoft recommends using security groups combined with permission sets for a more robust and scalable approach. Now, security groups are the older, static method of permission management. They are limited to Business Central and are less flexible because they don't automatically update based on user attributes. While security groups can still be useful, they are considered an older model and are being phased out in favor of user groups, which offer more dynamic and maintainable permission management. So, in summary, user groups are the modern, flexible, and dynamic way to manage access, especially with the integration of Microsoft Entra ID, while security groups are more static and limited, mainly used in older setups. This shift helps us better align our security and access controls with modern cloud-based practices. Let's take a closer look at the relationship between BC user groups and security groups. As you can see, modern identity and access management with Microsoft Entra ID and Business Central plays a key role here. The integration helps create smoother transitions and ensures consistent access control across different platforms, which is crucial for maintaining security and efficiency. One important aspect is that this integration supports legacy setups. This means organizations can map their existing user group permissions to security groups without a complete overhaul. It makes the transition easier and less disruptive. Additionally, the new approach aligns Business Central security groups with Microsoft Entra ID or Windows Active Directory security groups. This alignment allows for unified user management across all Microsoft D365 applications, simplifying administration and improving security. Historically, Business Central user groups managed permissions within Business Central itself, but their integration with Windows user groupings was limited. This new strategy bridges that gap, providing a more cohesive and streamlined permission management system that works seamlessly across the Microsoft ecosystem. Now, let's look at how we can convert user groups into permission sets. This is a key step in modernizing our approach to identity and access management with Microsoft Entra ID and Business Central. Instead of assigning permissions through user groups, we assign permissions directly to individual users. This means removing the user group assignment altogether. It's important to note that this approach doesn't utilize the new composable permission model just yet. Instead, what we do is assign new permission sets to each user based on what their user group previously granted them. This makes the management process more streamlined and easier to control on a user-by-user basis. By doing this, we gain greater flexibility and clarity, especially as we move toward more dynamic and scalable permission management. It's a way to leverage the new capabilities of the composable permission model, but in a practical, step-by-step manner that aligns with modern IAM best practices. So, essentially, we're shifting from managing permissions through groups to managing them directly at the user level, which helps us improve security, transparency, and agility in our access management. Now, let's talk about adding and assigning security groups in Business Central. When you're transitioning fully to using security groups, it's important to remove any legacy license-based permission configurations. This helps prevent conflicts and ensures your permissions are streamlined. By doing this, you centralize user and permission management, which significantly enhances security and makes scaling easier as your organization grows. Moving on to the actual steps. First, you create security groups in Microsoft Entra ID or Windows Active Directory. This is the foundation. Next, you link these Entra ID security groups to corresponding Business Central security groups. This linkage is crucial for maintaining consistency across your systems. Then, you create the Business Central security groups themselves and connect them to the Entra ID groups, establishing a clear and manageable structure. Finally, you define and assign permission sets to these Business Central security groups. This step ensures that the right users have the appropriate access levels. And remember, when transitioning fully, removing those old license-based permissions is key to maintaining a clean, secure environment. This process really centralizes control and boosts both security and scalability in your identity management. Let's take a closer look at license configuration versus security groups. Modern identity and access management, especially with Microsoft Entra ID and Business Central, relies heavily on how we assign permissions. When we talk about dynamic application of permissions to all users within a group, this means that any changes we make to the group's permissions automatically apply to every member. This approach works for both new users and those already in the system, making it very flexible and efficient. In contrast, license-based configurations tend to be more static. They assign permissions based on the user's license at the time of creation, which means these permissions don't automatically update if the license changes later or if you want to make quick adjustments across all users. That's why it's generally recommended to move away from license-based configurations for permissions. Instead, using security groups allows for immediate and consistent permission updates. When you change a group's permissions, it instantly affects all members, ensuring better control and security. To sum up, license-based setups are more static and limited to new users, while security groups offer a dynamic, scalable approach that simplifies permission management across your organization. This aligns with our overall goal of modern, efficient identity management. Now, let's talk about permission sets and how they help us create flexible and maintainable permission hierarchies within Business Central. The main goal here is to give us a way to control access precisely, but also to make it easier to update permissions as needed. This is where the composable model comes into play. It supports grouping related permissions logically, so we can manage permissions in a more organized way. One of the key advantages of these composable permission sets is that they can include base permissions and even reference other permission sets. This means we can build complex permission structures that are still easy to maintain and adapt over time. Rather than managing permissions on a user-by-user basis, we can create these sets that are reusable and adaptable. Let's also look at the components involved. In the past, we had legacy user groups, which combined permissions for multiple users, but those were often less flexible. Today, modern permission sets are much more granular and composable. They allow us to assign permissions more precisely and keep our permission management scalable. To clarify, permission sets are simply collections of permissions that define what actions users can perform within Business Central. They serve as a structured way to manage access control, aligning with the broader goal of modern identity and access management, especially when integrated with tools like Microsoft Entra ID. So, in essence, permission sets are a vital part of creating a secure, flexible, and manageable permission framework that supports the evolving needs of our organization. Now, let's take a closer look at user-defined versus system permission sets. As you can see, user-defined permission sets are customizable and editable, giving organizations the flexibility to tailor access rights to specific roles or unique business needs. This means you can create permissions that precisely match what your team requires, making your access management more efficient and aligned with your operational structure. On the other hand, we have system permission sets, which are predefined by Microsoft. These are non-editable and contain essential permissions necessary for core functionality. They serve as a reliable baseline, ensuring that fundamental access is consistently maintained across your organization. Understanding the difference between these two types of permission sets helps you make smarter decisions about how to manage access rights effectively, balancing flexibility with standardization within your overall identity and access management strategy. Let's take a closer look at how composing permission sets with hierarchy and references really enhances our approach to access management. This composable hierarchy is designed to boost modularity and reuse, which means we can create more flexible permission structures while reducing duplication. By doing so, managing permissions becomes simpler and more streamlined. One of the key benefits here is granular control. We can add or exclude specific permissions on particular objects, giving us the ability to fine-tune access exactly where it's needed. This level of detail helps ensure that users only get the permissions they require, nothing more, nothing less. Another important aspect is the ability to override permissions within this hierarchy. If we need to refine or adjust access for certain cases, we can do so without overhauling the entire permission set. Plus, this structure allows us to include permissions from multiple sets, which means we can combine different permission groups as needed, making our management even more flexible. Finally, permission sets can reference other sets, creating a hierarchy where base permissions are combined with reference sets. This layered approach really helps us build scalable, maintainable permission models that align with our overall identity and access management strategy. Now, let's talk about situations where permission sets can't fully replace user groups. While permission sets are quite powerful, some legacy functionalities of user groups require different approaches. For example, assigning multiple permission sets directly to users can help address certain limitations, but it often requires a careful combination of sets to replicate what a user group provides. This process can become quite cumbersome, especially when you need to assign multiple sets simultaneously. Unlike user groups, permission sets can't reference each other or inherit permissions, which limits their flexibility. User groups, on the other hand, offer better inheritance capabilities, making permission management more streamlined. When dealing with complex permission scenarios, permission sets can struggle, especially when multiple sets need to be combined. User groups simplify these scenarios by grouping permissions together, making it easier to manage and replicate functionalities that were straightforward with legacy user groups. So, while permission sets are useful, they do have their limitations, particularly when it comes to inheritance and complex permission structures. Now, let's talk about the new composable permissions in Business Central. These are designed to replace some of the older user group functionalities, and they do a great job of improving both security and how efficiently we can manage administration tasks. One of the key benefits is that they help us manage permission hierarchies more clearly. With defined precedence rules, we can ensure that access control is both structured and secure, reducing the chances of accidental or unauthorized access. Another important aspect is that these permissions include or exclude specific access levels, such as read, insert, modify, delete, and execute. This gives us fine-grained control over what users can do at a very detailed level. Plus, we can add or override permissions on individual objects. This means we can tailor access to meet unique requirements, which is especially useful in complex or specialized scenarios. Finally, these composable permissions allow us to group permission sets together, offering much more flexibility and precision when assigning permissions. This makes managing access not only more powerful, but also more streamlined, aligning well with our overall goal of modern identity and access management with Microsoft Entra ID and Business Central. Leveraging effective permissions is a powerful way to enhance security within your system. It ensures that users have the appropriate level of access that aligns with their specific roles and responsibilities. When we talk about enhancing security with role-based access, it really means giving users just enough permissions to do their jobs without exposing sensitive information or functions they shouldn't see. Administrators can manage these granular access controls effectively using effective permissions. For example, they might want to limit a user's ability to view GL entries while still allowing them to select transactions. That's the kind of precise control we're talking about. Managing these granular permissions helps identify overlaps or conflicts in what users are permitted to do. This ensures a smoother, conflict-free access management process, making it easier to maintain security and operational efficiency. Effective permissions also help administrators understand what permissions are actually active for each user. Sometimes, permissions can be complex or layered, so this clarity is crucial. It provides a real picture of user access, eliminating confusion. Finally, effective permissions give a consolidated view of all the permissions a user has, taking into account all the different permission sets and groups they belong to. This comprehensive overview helps you see the full picture of user access at a glance. Using effective permissions on users is a key aspect of modern identity and access management, especially with tools like Microsoft Entra ID and Business Central. It's all about making security smarter, more transparent, and easier to manage across your organization. Let's take a closer look at the testing checklist for permission projects. On this slide, we're focusing on how to ensure that permission configurations are thoroughly validated before going live. When documenting test results, it's important to include details like the status of each test, the date it was performed, and who conducted it. This structured documentation helps us confirm that restrictions are properly enforced, such as blocking vendors from accessing certain functions. Enforcing restrictions is a critical step. For example, making sure that vendors cannot access areas they're not supposed to. Similarly, verifying user access to critical functions is essential, like ensuring only authorized personnel can create vendors or post invoices. That's why testing role-specific scenarios, such as vendor creation or invoice posting, is so important. A comprehensive testing checklist acts as our roadmap during migration or updates, helping us validate that permissions are correctly set and that everything aligns with business requirements and compliance standards. Overall, having a clear, detailed checklist ensures that we don't overlook any key permission settings, maintaining security and operational integrity throughout the process. In this slide, we're looking at the overview of permission testing scripts. These scripts are really valuable because they help us identify issues more quickly. Instead of going through manual testing every time, scripts streamline the entire process, saving us time and effort. They also play a key role in ensuring consistency. When multiple testers are involved, scripts help maintain the same testing approach across the board, making sure we don't miss any scenarios. This comprehensive coverage is crucial for thorough permission validation. Furthermore, these scripts act as a step-by-step guide for testers. They walk through each action, outlining what should happen at each stage, which makes the testing process clearer and more organized. And an added benefit is automation. These scripts can automatically validate common business scenarios. For example, creating and managing vendors, posting purchase journals, or even blocking vendors to prevent transactions. All of these can be tested efficiently with automation. Overall, permission testing scripts are an essential part of ensuring our identity and access management is both effective and reliable, especially when working with tools like Microsoft Entra ID and Business Central. Now, let's move on to creating and copying permission sets within Microsoft Entra ID and Business Central. One key concept here is copying by reference. This method links your new permission set to the original, meaning any updates to the original permissions are reflected in the copy. It also allows you to make selective overrides if needed, giving you flexibility while maintaining a connection to the source. Next, we have the flat copy approach. This method duplicates all permissions directly, without any links to the original. The advantage here is that you can edit the permissions set independently, without affecting or being affected by the source permissions. It's a straightforward way to create a completely separate set of permissions. Then there's cloning. Cloning creates a new permission set that preserves references to the original permissions. This is useful if you want a copy that closely follows the original, but still has some flexibility for modifications. Finally, I want to highlight that administrators have multiple methods for creating permission sets. They can choose the approach that best fits their specific needs, whether that's copying by reference, flat copying, or cloning. This flexibility helps ensure that permission management is both efficient and tailored to your organizational requirements. All these options tie back to our overall goal: managing access efficiently and securely within Business Central. Now, let's talk about how this granular control helps us align permissions precisely with our organizational policies. Essentially, the highest permission level in the hierarchy sets the effective access, which means that if there's a conflict, the most permissive setting generally applies. But it's important to remember that exclusion takes precedence over inclusion, so if a user is excluded from certain permissions, that will override any grants. When managing permissions, we have several options. We can include specific access levels like read, insert, modify, delete, or execute, giving users the capabilities they need. Conversely, we can exclude certain access levels to restrict permissions where necessary. We also have the ability to reduce access, say, downgrade from direct to indirect, to limit what a user can do. All of these options come together within permission sets, which help us manage permissions more efficiently. By carefully configuring these sets, we ensure that users have exactly the right level of access, nothing more, nothing less, thus maintaining security and compliance across our organization. Now, let's talk about assigning permissions to security groups. The key idea here is to ensure that users inherit the right permissions dynamically through their group memberships. This approach really helps us centralize permission management, making it easier to keep things consistent and up to date. It also reduces the need for manual permission assignments, which can be time-consuming and error-prone. By doing this, we support scalable access control that aligns perfectly with organizational roles. So, instead of managing permissions for each individual, we assign permissions at the group level, and users automatically get the right access based on their group membership. Next, to enable this, we need to assign the appropriate permission sets to our Business Central security groups. This step is crucial because it defines what each group can do within the system. Finally, linking Microsoft Entra ID or Windows AD security groups to the corresponding Business Central security groups ensures that the permissions flow seamlessly. This linkage is the backbone of dynamic permission assignment, making sure that access is always aligned with the user's role and group membership. Overall, this method helps us maintain a secure, efficient, and scalable access management system that adapts easily as our organization grows. Now, let's take a closer look at a user permission management example, focusing on Cynthia Prebe. This example illustrates how permission sets are carefully aligned with a user's specific responsibilities, which helps us achieve controlled and auditable access within Business Central. First, you'll notice that her account is marked as active, with authentication enabled. This ensures that only authorized users can access the system, maintaining our security standards. When it comes to permissions, Cynthia has tailored access. She's granted posting rights, but she doesn't have view access. This kind of role-specific permission setup is crucial because it aligns her capabilities directly with her job functions, minimizing unnecessary access and potential risks. Additionally, Cynthia is assigned multiple permission sets, such as MGCGL entry post 1 and 2. These permission sets collectively define what she can do within the system, giving her the necessary tools to perform her tasks efficiently while maintaining control. Overall, this example underscores the importance of carefully managing user permissions, ensuring security, accountability, and operational efficiency within Business Central. Let's take a closer look at how dynamic security groups are really making a difference in action. This slide focuses on modern identity and access management with Microsoft Entra ID and Business Central. What's exciting here is how this dynamic model not only boosts security, but also simplifies administration. Instead of manually updating permissions all the time, the system automatically adjusts, saving us time and reducing errors. When we integrate with Microsoft Entra ID, it ensures that identity management stays consistent across the board. Any changes in group membership are reflected immediately, so user access is always up to date. This means that when someone joins or leaves a team, their access rights are instantly adjusted without delay. We can see active teams and groups within Business Central demonstrating this dynamic permission management. It's a real-time process where security groups automatically apply permissions to all members, making sure everyone has the right access at the right time. Overall, this approach enhances security while making permission management much more straightforward, bringing us closer to a more agile and secure digital environment. Let's talk about converting user groups to permission sets, which is a recommended approach for maintaining and aligning with modern permission frameworks. By making this switch, you ensure that your access control remains smoother and more adaptable for the future. The key idea here is that user groups can be converted into permission sets. Once converted, these permission sets can be assigned directly to individual users or security groups, giving you greater flexibility. Another option organizations have is to assign permissions directly to individual members. This method removes the dependency on user groups altogether and can simplify permission management in some cases. Overall, moving towards permission sets helps create a more sustainable and scalable access control system, keeping your environment aligned with modern identity and access management best practices. Let's take a closer look at the hierarchy of permission sets in Business Central. This structure allows us to define base permissions and referenced permissions, which together enable complex yet manageable security configurations. Essentially, it replaces the older legacy user group system, offering much more flexibility. With composable permission sets, we can include or exclude specific permissions to tailor access precisely to what users need. For example, there are permission sets for areas like accounts payable, sales, and journals. Each of these grants granular access to related tables and functions, giving us fine control over what users can see and do. This modular approach makes managing security much more efficient and adaptable. These permission sets are linked to Microsoft Entra ID or Windows Active Directory security groups. This integration ensures centralized, dynamic user management, so permissions can be updated easily and in a coordinated way across the organization. Another key point is that each permission set specifies what actions users can perform, whether it's reading data, inserting new records, modifying existing ones, deleting information, or executing specific tasks on Business Central objects. This detailed control helps us enforce security without restricting productivity. Finally, Business Central uses security groups to manage user access efficiently. By assigning permission sets to these groups, we can ensure users have the right level of access based on their roles, making security management both streamlined and effective. Now, let's look at how the Composable Permissions sets model enhances our finance and AP roles. This approach allows finance teams to tailor permissions very precisely, which means we can improve security without sacrificing operational efficiency. It's all about giving the right people the right access, no more, no less. This model supports dynamic user management, too. When changes are made to security groups, those updates automatically reflect in user permissions. That removes the need for manual reassignments and helps keep everything current and secure. By assigning permission sets directly to security groups, we ensure that everyone in a role has consistent and appropriate access. This consistency is key for avoiding errors and maintaining control over sensitive data. The permission sets include permissions on critical financial tables like vendor ledger entry, GL entry, and purchase header. Access levels can range from full control to indirect, depending on what's needed for the role. For example, sets like ACC payable flat or ACC payable by ref define exactly what actions users can perform, whether it's posting invoices, viewing ledger entries, or other activities. This clarity helps us manage what users can do within the system. In the broader picture, finance and accounts payable roles in Business Central rely heavily on these permission sets. They're essential for controlling access to sensitive financial data and processes, ensuring both security and efficiency. Overall, this model gives us a flexible, scalable way to manage permissions that aligns perfectly with our goals of security, compliance, and operational agility. Now let's look at the process of entering a vendor. First, under the Invoicing Fast tab, you need to select the Vendor Posting Group and General Business Posting Group from the drop-down menus. These fields are essential because they help categorize the vendor correctly for accounting purposes. Next, you'll enter the vendor number. You can do this manually if you have a specific number in mind, or you can use the default numbering series set up in your system. Then, make sure to fill in the name and address fields accurately, as these details are critical for correct communication and record keeping. Moving on, to create a new vendor record, you should select New from the Action pane. This initiates the vendor creation process within Business Central. To find this option, navigate through Financial Management, then Payables, and finally, Vendors. This path ensures you're in the right place to manage your vendor records effectively. Finally, it's important to validate that users with the appropriate permissions can create new vendor records in Business Central. This step confirms that your access controls are functioning correctly and that authorized personnel can perform necessary tasks without issues. This testing process helps ensure that your vendor onboarding is smooth, accurate, and secure, aligning with our overall goal of modern identity and access management using Microsoft Entra ID and Business Central. Now, let's walk through the testing scenario where we inactivate a vendor. First, we want to confirm that our permission sets are correctly restricting or allowing vendor status changes. This step is crucial because it ensures that our system complies with the business rules we've set and that our test scenario is valid. Next, after verifying permissions, we need to apply the selected blocking option by saving our changes. It's important to double-check that the block is active and correctly applied, so the system behaves as expected during the test. To do this, we'll use the drop-down menu to choose our blocking options. Remember, options include Payment, which blocks only payments, or All, which blocks all transactions related to the vendor. Selecting the appropriate option here is key to testing the specific restrictions we want to enforce. Now, to set the actual vendor restrictions, locate the Blocked field under the General FAST tab. This field is essential because it's where we specify whether a vendor is restricted or not. Finally, to access the vendor we want to work with, navigate to Financial Management, then Payables, and choose Vendors. Open the vendor card, and from there, you can set or review the blocking options. This step completes the process, allowing us to see how the restrictions are applied and ensure everything works as intended. Now, let's look at the final step in our testing scenario, entering a purchase journal. Once you've reviewed your entries, it's essential to finalize and post the journal to ensure that all the data successfully updates the general ledger. This step confirms that your transaction is properly recorded and reflected in your financial statements. To do this, you'll input all the necessary information, such as vendor details, the amounts involved, and the general ledger accounts affected. It's important to double-check these details for accuracy before posting. Next, you'll initiate a new journal entry within the Purchase Journals interface. This process is straightforward. Simply create a new journal entry and fill in the required fields. And to access the Purchase Journals section, navigate through Financial Management, then Payables, and finally, Purchase Journals. This pathway helps you locate the correct area quickly and efficiently. Remember, this step is crucial to closing the loop in our purchasing process, ensuring everything is properly recorded and ready for review.